Texas, spring 1945. A rancher named Jack Morrison stood at the fence line of Camp Swift, hat in hand, asking a German woman prisoner if she'd marry him. She wore prison-issue clothing. He wore dusty work boots and carried wildflowers picked from his own land. Between them stretched barbed wire, an ocean of propaganda, and a war that had killed millions. Before you hear what happened next, if you're enjoying this deep dive into an untold chapter of World War II, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss these stories. And drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from history lovers around the world. By summer, 37 similar proposals would cross that same wire. Washington would send federal agents racing south to understand how American cowboys had managed to do what no Allied propaganda campaign could, turn enemies into family. The trains arrived in darkness. February 1945, and the boxcars rattled through the Texas night, carrying cargo the locals never expected to see. German women, prisoners of war. Some barely 20 years old, others middle-aged nurses pulled from captured territories across Europe. The cars slowed at Camp Swift, 50 miles northeast of Austin, where the air smelled of cedar and limestone. Inside, the women pressed against wooden slats, watching America pass in fragments. Endless sky. Flat land stretching to horizons that seemed to have no end. Ranch houses with lights burning yellow in windows. This was the enemy homeland they'd been warned about, land of savages where prisoners starved and guards showed no mercy. The doors opened with the screech of metal on metal. Lieutenant Sarah Brennan stood on the platform, clipboard in hand, watching as the women climbed down. Most moved slowly, stiff from days of travel, eyes adjusting to searchlights that turned the camp perimeter bright as noon. They wore whatever they'd been captured in, Wehrmacht auxiliary uniforms, nurses' dresses, civilian clothes stained and torn. "Form a line," Brennan called out. Single file, the women obeyed, silent and mechanical, forming a ragged column along the platform. Brennan walked the line, counting, checking faces against her manifest. 42 women, ages ranging from 19 to 53. All captured in France during the final Allied push. Most from medical units that had stayed too long trying to evacuate German wounded before American tanks arrived. A young woman near the front swayed on her feet. Brennan caught her arm. "When did you last eat?" The woman stared, uncomprehending. Brennan tried again in rough German. "Maybe I don't remember," the woman whispered. This was not procedure. Procedure demanded immediate registration, fingerprinting, assignment of prisoner numbers. But Brennan had served in North Africa. She'd seen what prolonged transport did to human beings. "Get these women to the mess hall before processing," she told the guards. "They're dead on their feet." The mess hall at Camp Swift had been built to feed American soldiers heading overseas. Now at 2 in the morning it stood empty except for 2 cooks roused from their bunks. They worked in silence, cracking eggs, frying bacon, making coffee strong enough to strip paint. The German women filed in, still moving like sleepwalkers. They sat at long wooden tables, hands folded in their laps, waiting for whatever came next. The propaganda had been clear: starvation rations, beatings, hard labor until you dropped. They expected 10 cups of water, maybe stale bread. Instead, the cooks brought platters, eggs scrambled and steaming, bacon in strips that crackled with grease, toast, butter, jam, coffee in ceramic mugs with cream and sugar on the side, oatmeal with brown sugar and raisins, orange juice, the first citrus most had seen in years. No one moved. The food sat untouched while the women stared at it as if it might be a trick. In Germany, food had meant ration cards and empty shelves. Cities had been turned to rubble, and meals were measured in potatoes and black bread when there was food at all. And here, in an enemy prison camp, sat enough food to feed a family for a week. Greta Hoffman, a former nurse from Hamburg, reached out and touched the bacon. It was real, still hot. She looked at Brennan, who stood by the door. "This for us?" she asked in careful English. "It's for prisoners," Brennan said. "That's you? Eat?" They hesitated until the smell of bacon and coffee filled the room. Then forks lifted. Tears fell as they tasted eggs and bread. For 20 minutes the only sounds were silverware and quiet sobs. Later, Greta would write, "Real eggs. Bacon that tasted like before the war." Camp Swift stretched across 78 square miles of central Texas. Once cattle country, it became a military training ground in 1942. The women's compound sat in the eastern section, enclosed by chain-link fencing and guard towers. There was no barbed wire. The space felt almost residential, with open ground between barracks, picnic tables under shade trees, and a small garden plot. The morning after arrival, Brennan addressed them. "You are prisoners of war under the Geneva Convention. You will not be harmed or starved. You will receive medical care and fair treatment." She paused. "You will also work. Kitchens, laundry, maintenance, paperwork. Those with medical training will work in the hospital." Maria Vogel raised her hand. "We were told American camps force prisoners to work like slaves." "You're in Texas," Brennan replied. "Nobody's picking cotton." The women learned the camp's rhythm. Formation at dawn. Meals in the mess hall, work until noon, rest, then more work. Sundays were free. Food remained plentiful. The work proved easier than expected. Greta joined the hospital staff, working beside American medics who respected her skills and sought her advice. One Sunday in late March, a rancher named Thomas Crawford arrived in a dust-covered truck. He removed his hat when he met Brennan. "I'd like to request workers," he said. "Spring roundup's coming. I've lost most of my hands. I'll pay the camp fair wages. I'm not looking for slaves." "You've read the Geneva Convention?" Brennan asked. "Yes, ma'am. Wanted to know what I was getting into." 3 days later, Washington approved temporary agricultural labor. Brennan asked for volunteers. 12 women stepped forward, Greta among them. Texas opened before them. In the back of Crawford's truck, Greta watched the land stretch endlessly. Grass rippled in the wind. Fences cut straight lines to the horizon. Cattle clustered like moving shadows. The sky seemed impossibly wide. In Germany, everything had boundaries. Here, there were none. At the Circle C ranch, Margaret Crawford welcomed them inside. "You'll want lunch," she said. "We are prisoners," Greta replied. "You'll work better on a full stomach. Sandwiches, pickles, potato salad, cold lemonade waiting on the table." The women ate. Crawford explained the work. "Walk the fence line. Mark trouble spots with red flags. Don't chase snakes." He left them alone in knee-high grass. Maria said quietly, "He just left us. We could walk away." "Where to?" Greta answered. "And then what?" They worked 4 hours in the sun, flagging broken posts and loose wire. Wind filled their hair with dust. Heat pressed down on their skin. But the land did something to them. The openness made space inside them. "I can breathe here," Maria said. "So can I," Greta replied. When Crawford returned, they had marked 37 problem spots. "Good work," he said. "Next Sunday we'll try the north pasture." They returned the next Sunday, and the next. Soon every Sunday followed a pattern. Ranchers arrived at Camp Swift in trucks. Volunteers rode in the back. The work rotated. Fences, cattle, water tanks, clearing brush. The ranchers treated them like hired hands, which meant like people. Lunch was shared under shade trees. Water was passed around. Extra hats and gloves appeared. Broken English and laughter filled the gaps. and then came the horses. Jack Morrison of the Double M Ranch brought several gentle Maoris into a corral. "Any of you ladies know how to ride?" he called. Most women had grown up in cities. Horses had been rare, reserved for soldiers or farmers. But one woman stepped forward. "I rode as a child," said Anaclean. "My uncle had a farm." Morrison pointed to a Palomino Mare with a white blaze. "That's Daisy, gentle as a kitten." Anna approached slowly. Daisy sniffed her hand and nuzzled her palm. Morrison showed her how to check the girth, helped her into the saddle, and led them forward at a slow walk, coaching her hands and posture. After a few minutes, he stepped away. Anna guided Daisy on her own, then eased her into a slow trot. The other prisoners stopped working to watch. Her careful, watchful face softened into something like joy. For the first time since capture, she didn't feel like a prisoner at all. "Natural rider," Morrison called. By day's end, 3 more women had ridden Daisy under his patient instruction. That evening, Greta told Brennan, wonder in her voice, "We rode horses." Word spread quickly. The next Sunday, nearly 20 women volunteered for ranch work, double the usual number. The ranchers had to turn some away, promising to expand the program if approved. Something fundamental shifted. The prisoners were no longer just enduring captivity. They were starting to experience something that felt like freedom. By June, the change was unmistakable. German women worked beside Americans with an ease that seemed to erase the war. They shared jokes, traded German phrases for Texas slang, and rode across open prairie, checking fences and moving cattle. Then the ranchers' wives began coming. Margaret Crawford brought fresh cookies and lemonade. At lunch, she sat with the women under the trees and asked about their lives. At first the conversations were cautious, but Margaret had a way of making people feel safe. Stories emerged: families, hometowns, childhood meals. Greta spoke of nursing in Hamburg before the bombing. Maria described routing calls as a telephonist, confused by a war that made no sense. Margaret listened without judgment, letting them be human again. Soon other ranchers' wives followed. They learned names, brought food, asked questions, and treated the prisoners like neighbors who'd fallen on hard times. Washington noticed. A report landed on Colonel Parker's desk. Morale was unusually high, local integration exceeded expectations, and most striking of all, there had been 0 escape attempts. Parker called Brennan. "Your prisoners are working unsupervised?" "Yes, sir. They're interacting with locals and receiving gifts. Work gloves and spare hats, sir. Practical items. The concern is fraternization," Parker said. "We're sending an inspector." Captain Harold Simmons arrived 2 weeks later, a man who treated regulations as sacred text. He reviewed files, interviewed guards, and insisted on accompanying the Sunday work detail, riding with Morrison. At the Double M, Morrison explained they'd be moving cattle across open range. "You're putting prisoners on horses?" Simmons asked. "They're good riders," Morrison said. "Better than some Americans. And if they ride away?" Morrison stared at him. "Captain, they don't know this land, don't know where towns are, and they're German prisoners in Texas. Where exactly would they go?" Simmons watched the women saddle their horses and work cattle for hours, moving with confidence born of practice. At lunch, Morrison's wife joined the group, prisoners and Americans sharing sandwiches and small talk. Simmons sat apart, taking notes. Back at camp, he told Brennan, "This isn't standard procedure." "No, sir. The regulations don't clearly allow this. They don't prohibit it either." He studied her. "You're running a social experiment. I'm treating prisoners under the Geneva Convention. You're making them American." Brennan held his gaze. "Would that be so terrible?" Simmons closed his notebook. "I'll allow the program to continue, with oversight." After he left, Brennan finally breathed. Jack Morrison fell in love on a Thursday in early June while teaching Anna how to rope a fence post. She kept missing, laughing at herself. In that laugh he saw her differently. She was 23. He was 36. She was a prisoner. He was her supervisor. Every rule said it was impossible. By July he stopped coming on Sundays, trying to protect them both. Anna noticed and understood. It lasted 3 weeks. In late July, Morrison showed up and found her working alone at a water tank. "I can't stop thinking about you," he said. Anna looked at him, wind lifting her hair. "I know. This is impossible. I know that too." They stood 3 feet apart, the space between them heavy with everything they couldn't say. Morrison turned and walked away, but he wasn't the only one. Throughout the prisoner work program, connections were forming that went beyond professional. Thomas Crawford's son, Robert, had met Maria Vogel and filled letters with her name. A ranch hand named Billy Carter courted Greta Hoffman. William Hart had fallen for a prisoner named Lisa Werner. By September, the pattern was undeniable. The first proposal came in late September. Morrison appeared at Camp Swift on a Tuesday and asked to speak to Brennan. "I want to marry one of the prisoners." "Anna Clean?" "Yes, ma'am. She's a prisoner of war. Germany is still technically at war." "I understand." "But I love her." Brennan warned him the process would be long, uncertain, and likely denied. "Then start it," Morrison said. "I'll follow whatever it takes." Brennan submitted the request. Parker called 3 days later. "One proposal I could handle. Now there are 6 more. People don't consult regulations when deciding who to love," Brennan said. Within 2 weeks, 37 formal proposals reached the War Department. Washington had no protocol. A new investigative team arrived at Camp Swift. Military, FBI, State Department, and legal officers. They reviewed records and conducted interviews. The JAG questioned Brennan. "You knew about Morrison and Clean?" "I suspected." "And didn't intervene?" "They weren't violating regulations. I knew human beings were behaving like human beings. The ranchers denied any misconduct. They said they'd fallen in love gradually and unexpectedly. The FBI found no security breaches. The women worked hard, showed gratitude, and distanced themselves from Nazi ideology." Greta Hoffman described how propaganda had shaped her beliefs and how American treatment had changed her perspective. "I don't believe in National Socialism anymore. I want to stay here." After 3 weeks, investigators found administrative flaws but no misconduct, coercion, or exploitation. Parker informed Brennan the program was being cited as a model for rehabilitation. Washington would allow marriages case by case, after background checks, waiting periods, and formal peace with Germany. The news spread quickly. Some couples dissolved under the strain, but most endured. Morrison kept coming every Sunday, working beside Anna, never touching her beyond what was necessary, existing in quiet, shared patience. By December, the program felt almost normal. The prisoners had been at Camp Swift 10 months. The community stopped seeing them as enemies. Christmas arrived with bitter cold. Ranchers hosted a celebration at Camp Swift, decorating the mess hall, bringing food, and setting up a tree. Families and prisoners shared food, stories, and carols in English and German. Brennan watched German women sit beside American families. Children played with prisoners turned surrogate aunts. Morrison and Anna sat shoulder to shoulder, quiet and waiting. Greta thanked Brennan for treating us like human beings, for not letting us stay enemies. "You chose to trust us," Brennan said. Greta admitted she'd feared capture, then realized the propaganda had been lies. "Not all of it," Brennan replied. "But not here. People here chose to be decent." In March 1946, the policy became official. Marriages were approved with background checks and a 6-month waiting period. Morrison and Anna were the first to complete it. In April, they received final approval. They married on Morrison's ranch. A white dress was found. Morrison wore his best suit. Anna spoke careful vows in accented English. Morrison's voice broke. When they were pronounced married, applause rolled across the prairie. Brennan attended in civilian clothes, watching Anna clean become Anna Morrison. Other marriages followed. Maria Vogel became Maria Crawford. Greta Hoffman married Billy Carter. Some women returned to Germany, searching for family and home. Others stayed in Texas, building new lives. For many, Texas became home in ways Germany never could. By the end of 1946, Camp Swift's program was studied internationally. Fewer than 2% of the women showed continued sympathy for Nazi ideology. Nearly 60% chose to remain in the United States. The secret was simple. Treating prisoners like people worked better than treating them like enemies. Years later, Brennan said, "We just remembered that prisoners were people." Anna Morrison became a respected horse trainer. She and Jack raised 3 bilingual children. Maria Crawford became a teacher. One of her children became a diplomat. Greta Carter became a nurse practitioner. The town of Taylor erected a small plaque. During World War II, German prisoners of war worked alongside Texas ranchers. Many stayed, married, and became part of our community. Their story reminds us that humanity transcends conflict and dignity creates peace. Camp Swift became a footnote in history, but for those who lived it, it was proof that propaganda dissolves when met with daily human kindness. Eggs and bacon undermined years of conditioning. Work side by side erased fear. The German women learned Americans were not monsters. The ranchers learned Germans were not fanatics. Peace wasn't built only by treaties, but by ordinary people who chose decency over hatred, work over contempt, and dignity over fear. The sun still rises over central Texas rangeland, burning across horizons that stretch to impossible distances. Cattle still graze on land that once held prison camps. The barracks are gone, returned to prairie grass and cedar. But the legacy remains in families built from unlikely unions, in communities shaped by wartime necessities, in the quiet proof that treating enemies like humans makes them something else entirely. Not American, necessarily, not converted or conquered. Just human again, which turned out to be enough